Her head was raised above the block before the blood had time to soak into the straw. The crowd roared, but no one knew exactly why the queen had been killed: for sinning with her brother, for secret trysts with a court musician, or for knowledge too dangerous to the throne. This death marked the end not only of her, but of an entire world in which power and flesh were so closely intertwined that the decay of one became the decay of the other. But there were long weeks before the axe fell. Weeks when her body and mind slowly rotted away in captivity, while ministers, guards, and priests writhed in fear around her. According to reports from the keepers of the royal chambers, the first signs of illness appeared shortly after her arrest. The scribe's report noted, "Her Majesty's tongue has turned white, her breathing is heavy, and she has had a fever for 3 nights in a row. Her pulse is weak. Her urine is cloudy and has an unpleasant odor." Doctors invited from universities began with the usual remedies: bloodletting in small portions twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Leeches were placed on her temples and under her breasts for a quarter of an hour. Cauterization was applied to specific points on her shoulders to release the evil vapors. She was given ointments made from pork fat, crushed garlic, and vinegar, which were rubbed into her skin twice a day. At dawn, she was given a pinch of opium powder to relieve the pain. At night, she was given 2 spoonfuls of poppy syrup to help her sleep. She was kept in a narrow stone chamber with windows covered with felt. To hide the smell, the straw was changed every morning, but the stench still permeated the walls. The felt pads under her body quickly became soaked with sweat and urine. The servants wrote in their reports, "Her Majesty's heels are cracked, the sores on her shins are oozing pus, and traces of pus remain on the bed." Every change of linen was accompanied by complaints and screams. The skin stuck to the fabric, and when it was torn off, the sheet remained on the wounds. The guards at the doors were changed 3 times a day. The keys were held by a captain from the old nobility, but at night, people from the new entourage were sent to him, trying to enter the chambers without the knowledge of their superiors. Reports mentioned secret passages through the gallery used by the heir's confidants. They checked whether the queen was still alive and whether she had signed a confession. The guard on duty tasted every bowl of food, and every cup of wine was poured into a silver vessel and sealed. But rumors of substitution were rife. It was said that the seals were redrawn at night and poison could be added after inspection. Confessions were held daily. The priest came at dawn and sat for an hour, listening to her confessions. At first, she repeated the same thing, that she had not sinned with her brother or the musician, that the accusations were false, that they wanted to destroy her for the sake of a new wife for the king. But gradually, under the weight of the heat and pain, her words changed. "If my flesh is infected with sin, let the Lord remove it with fire," she said one night after the doctor applied a hot iron to her thigh. The doctors recorded every deterioration. The fever is not subsiding. Her eyes are cloudy. Her tongue is swollen. Her pulse is barely perceptible. She is sweating profusely, and the smell is sweet, like rotting flesh. The servants noticed that she often muttered in her sleep, calling her brother by name, then suddenly began to scream that he had betrayed her. Sometimes she laughed, quietly and eerily, as if talking to someone invisible in the corner of the room. The ambassador's reports mention that advisors gathered in the corridors every night. Some demanded her immediate execution, fearing that the disease would kill her before the axe, and then rumors of a holy martyr would cause unrest. Others wanted to extract a confession from her to justify her death and strengthen the throne. A hidden war was raging between the supporters of the old nobility and the people of the new circle. Some guarded her peace, while others sought a way to force her to sign the papers. The people in the streets said different things. Some whispered that the Queen had actually contracted the disease from shameless relationships, others that she had been poisoned by the very people who were now demanding her execution. The monastery chronicler noted, "There is confusion among the people, for they do not know the truth. But fear is growing that God will punish the land for unjust judgment." Her body slowly gave up. Every day, new sores were recorded, on her back, on her elbows, on her lips. Her voice became hoarse, her breathing wheezy. Sometimes she still got out of bed and tried to give orders, demanded that a notary be called, but her words no longer had any power. The papers she dictated were soon rewritten by other hands, and the seals were changed at night. Weeks passed. She was still alive, still holding on, even though every day the doctors whispered, "She won't live until morning." But she lived on, and her suffering only intensified. The more her body decayed, the greater the fear grew in the corridors. No one knew what was worse, her survival or her death. By mid-spring, her condition became the subject of constant reports. The doctors recorded every hour. Pulse weak, tongue grey, urine flaky, smell unbearable. Sweat poured continuously, and the sheets were changed 4 times a day. The ulcers on her legs and back swelled, the edges turned black, and thick pus oozed out when pressed. The doctors tried to treat her in the usual way. Bloodletting in small portions, 1 cup every other day, leeches on her temples and under her tongue for 1/4 of an hour, compresses of wormwood and vinegar, which were changed every half hour. They gave her powder from poppy seed pods with honey, 2 spoonfuls at night. But the pain did not subside. According to the servants, her cries could be heard outside the walls. Sometimes they were interrupted by a long moan, followed by silence, and the guards at the door crossed themselves anxiously, thinking she had died. But after a minute, new convulsions began, and she again called out to her brother and to God. Rumors of her night visions found their way into reports. One of the scribes wrote, "Her Majesty speaks to shadows in the corner, sees her brother, holds her hands in front of her as if embracing him. Then she screams that he has a knife and wants to kill her." These records were secretly passed on to advisors and interpreted as proof of insanity, which, according to those in favor of execution, reinforced the need for a quick verdict. The guards were reinforced in her chambers. The keys were now held by 3 people, one of the old knights, one of the heir's confidants, and one of the king's close associates. No one could enter without 3 seals. But secret passages still remained. At night, a notary brought in by people from the new entourage would sneak into her cell. He would bring papers and try to force her to sign with her shaky hand. According to witnesses, she refused, saying that she did not admit guilt, and demanded to see her brother and musician so that she could speak in front of witnesses. The priest repeated the confession every day. She no longer insisted on her innocence so confidently. Sometimes she confessed to a thought crime, saying that her heart was attached to her brother, but then immediately denied it, cried, and swore that everything she had said was a feverish delusion. These vacillations strengthened both sides. Some saw it as a confession, others as the torment of an innocent woman. The smell of her chambers became a proverb in the palace. Servants who carried out her laundry wrote, "The fabric is soaked in pus and blood. The stench is sweetish, it is hard to keep from vomiting." To drown out the stench, they burned resin and wormwood in large bowls, but the smoke only mixed with the smell. The guards demanded to be changed more often because, in their words, the smell of decay emanates from her, and this is a sign from God. Political games became increasingly fierce. The old nobility wanted the execution to take place as soon as possible, fearing popular unrest. The new entourage sought to extract a will from her in which her property would pass to their people. Foreign ambassadors reported, "We see in these chambers not a woman, but a symbol of power rotting before our eyes. Her fate is the fate of the crown." The heir kept his distance, but whispered through his confidants that he would agree to the execution if a confession were obtained. His people checked the papers every night, rewrote lines, and forged signatures. But no one dared to reveal the final decision. Everyone feared that the death of a sick woman without official recognition would spark rumors of martyrdom. Meanwhile, the disease progressed. She hardly ate anything. Her servants tried to feed her, but she would only take a few spoonfuls of broth and a little bread, the rest causing her to vomit. Cracks appeared on her lips, and her tongue swelled and turned purple. The doctors noted, "The smell from her mouth is unbearable. Her breathing is wheezy, her eyes are cloudy, and her skin is covered with scabs." Sometimes they applied hot stones to her stomach in an attempt to drive out the bad juices, but this caused new burns and intensified her suffering. Despite her weakness, she still tried to dictate words to her servants. One of the letters intercepted by the guards read, "Do not believe what I say under the torture of illness. It is all a lie. God knows the truth." The paper was confiscated and the servant severely punished, but the very thought of her resistance alarmed the advisors. So the days passed. Nightly meetings were held in the corridors. They argued about the executions of heretics, which coincided with her suffering. Women accused of having ties to the devil were executed, and it was said that their blood would pacify the people. Others believed that her head alone would suffice. She continued to live, contrary to expectations. Her body was decaying, her mind was confused, but she remained at the center of the struggle. Each new day when she was found still breathing meant new intrigues, new fears, new plans. Her suffering became a political tool. By the beginning of summer, her mind was already broken by illness. Servants wrote in their reports, "Her Majesty is delirious," calling her brother by name, reaching out her hands into the void, laughing and crying for no reason. Sometimes she spoke so loudly that the guards at the door heard every word and passed them on to the advisors. Some nights she begged her brother to save her. Others, she screamed that he himself had handed her over to her executioners. These words became weapons in the hands of the parties. Some used them as proof of her sin, others as evidence of her martyrdom. Her body was breaking down faster than her mind. The doctors recorded, "The ulcers are deep, the skin is covered in black scabs, pus flows continuously. She has had a fever for 5 days. Her pulse is barely detectable. Her urine is foul-smelling with sediment. Breathing is wheezing with a smell of decay. Bloodletting continued, half a cup twice a week. Leeches were placed on her neck and armpits, but they barely stuck to her skin and quickly fell off. Cauterization on her sides left black marks around which the skin peeled off. At night, She was given 2 spoonfuls of poppy syrup, but her sleep became nightmarish. She screamed as if she saw the faces of dead people. She was tied to the bed with leather straps. Servants changed her linen 5 or 6 times a day and wrote in their reports, traces of urine on the felt, heels bleeding, nails blackened and crumbling. The servants were given gloves and rags to touch her body. One of them later said in his testimony, "The fear was such that it felt like we were holding not a living woman, but a dead person who was still moving." Almost no one entered the chambers without extreme necessity. Access was restricted. Only 3 servants, 1 doctor, and a priest were allowed in. Even the heir did not dare to approach her. At night, there were double guards around the chambers, and the keys were kept in different towers so that no one could get inside without everyone's permission. But there were still people who got in through secret passages, leaving papers and taking notes. They suspected a plot by the old nobility who wanted her to admit what happened. The priest noted that she could no longer speak clearly. Sometimes her words sounded like whispers, sometimes like a wheeze, but every morning she was still confessed. She would swear that she was innocent, then suddenly whisper, "Yes, I have sinned with my heart, but not with my body." Sometimes she begged for her brother's life to be spared. Her confessions were recorded by scribes, and each entry became a subject of debate in the council. The political struggle intensified. The old nobility demanded a quick execution to prevent her death in bed, which could turn her into a holy martyr. Her new entourage still tried to extract a will and force her to admit treason so that her property could be confiscated. Foreign ambassadors wrote, "The palace reeks of decay, and the smell spreads throughout the country. The people do not know whether the queen is alive or has been replaced by a ghost." Rumors spread. Some said that her brother was indeed sharing her bed. Others that it was a fabrication to justify the king's new marriage. Servants carrying out the laundry whispered that they saw signs of the devil on the sheets, as if black symbols were burning out from the heat of her body. The people of the city said that the illness was a punishment from heaven for her secret sins, and that her execution would purify the country. Her body emitted an increasingly strong odor. Doctors tried to suppress the stench with smoke, herbs, and vinegar, but it was useless. When she opened her mouth, it seemed as if the air in the chambers became poisonous. The guards complained that after their shifts, they vomited and their clothes were saturated with the stench. Despite her weakness, she sometimes raised her head and tried to give orders. Once she demanded that a notary be called and dictated her will, naming those who were to preserve her honor. But the paper was immediately confiscated, and the council declared that the signature was illegible and invalid. In response, her new entourage rewrote the document in her name and affixed a seal during the night. The councillors argued through the night. Some said that her death without a sentence would cause an uprising, while others demanded that she be brought to trial, even if she was unable to walk. The heir kept his distance, but his confidants secretly prepared papers for the confiscation of her family's lands. She was still alive, although the doctors assured everyone that every new dawn would be her last. The longer she lingered between life and death, the stronger the suspicions and fears grew. Some saw this as the work of the devil, others as a sign of God's judgment on the authorities themselves. By the end of the summer, she could hardly see. Her servants wrote, "Her Majesty's eyes are covered with a cloudy film, her eyelids are inflamed, and pus is running down her cheeks. She stares into space and does not recognize anyone. Doctors examined her every day. Her tongue was black and swollen. Her teeth were loose and falling out. Her breathing was hoarse and smelled of rot. They noted that the skin on her hands and feet had turned grey, was peeling away from the flesh in places, and her fingernails were crumbling, leaving bloody edges. Her body no longer moved on its own. She was turned on her side, so that the wounds would not eat away at her bones, but the ulcers still grew deeper. The servants wrote in their reports, "There is a wound the size of a palm on her thigh. The edges are black, and the smell is pungent. There are pus-filled cavities on her back, swarming with worms." These records were hidden from the court, but the servants whispered among themselves that the queen was already a corpse, merely breathing. To keep her alive, they gave her warm wine and broth. She spat out most of the food, some of it flowing out of her mouth along with blood. The doctors gave her opium powder in the morning to dull the pain and poppy syrup at night. But even with these drugs, she screamed in her sleep, broke free from her straps, and scratched the bed with what remained of her fingernails. Access to her was completely restricted. Only 2 servants and 1 doctor were allowed into her chambers. All other information was passed on via notes. The priest came in the morning, but said that her confession was already unintelligible. She whispers individual words, calls for her brother, then suddenly prays and falls into a stupor. Words about sin and forgiveness became indistinguishable. Either she was confessing or simply delirious. The council effectively excluded her from political life. Her old associates demanded her immediate execution, claiming that her illness was a sign from heaven that she had sinned. Her new associates no longer believed it was possible to obtain her signature and began to prepare the documents themselves. At night, people with seals and ink entered her chambers and laid papers on the table, but no one sought her signature anymore. Her hand could not hold a pen. An open struggle was going on around the throne. The heir secretly consulted with the captains of the guard to prevent riots after her death. The old nobility demanded that her brother and the musician be brought to trial, believing that only their execution would clear the memory of the dynasty. The new circle was arranging new marriages for the king and discussing how the lands and titles would be distributed. Ambassadors from foreign powers reported, "The palace is divided. Some are preparing the axe, others are preparing marriages. Between them stands only the breath of a dying woman." Rumors spread throughout the city. Some said that she was being kept in an iron mask to hide her decomposing face. Others claimed that she was already dead and that her body was being displayed to deceive the people. The crowd gathered at the palace gates, awaiting the verdict. The smell from her chambers became so strong that the guards asked to change shifts more often. Reports noted, "The walls have absorbed the stench. Smoke and herbs are of no help. Servants are tearing their clothes to cover their noses. Several servants died of fever, and it was said that they had been infected by her. But she was still alive. Her body was rotting. Her eyes were blind. Her tongue was slurred, but she was still breathing." This drove the council mad. It seemed that death itself did not want to take her until the authorities decided the fate of the crown. At night, meetings were held in the corridors. They read the doctor's reports and decided whether to bring her before the people in court, even if she could not walk. They discussed the possibility of replacing her body so that her death could be announced at the right moment. Rumors of a conspiracy spread. Everyone was afraid of being accused of forgery. She remained at the center of the struggle, even though she was almost dead. Her suffering became a living symbol of the regime's power. Every new day she breathed meant new intrigues and new fears. By the beginning of autumn, her breathing became rare and labored. The doctors recorded, "Her pulse is fading, her eyes are motionless, her skin is cold and clammy." New sores appeared on her body. The skin on her stomach and chest turned black, and when the servants changed her linen, pieces of flesh came away with the fabric. The smell in the chambers was so pungent that even the guards, accustomed to the stench, could not stay at the door for more than an hour. The servants wrote, "It is impossible to touch her without feeling nauseous. The felt under her is soaked through with pus and blood." Despite her condition, the confession continued. The priest stood nearby, but could hardly hear a word. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. Sometimes it seemed that she was whispering her brother's name, sometimes prayers. She lay motionless more and more often, and the doctors assured the council that her hour was near. During the last week, she was kept alive not for her life, but for political reasons. Some demanded that she be declared dead, and her body brought out to the people, while others insisted on a public execution to finish the job with an axe. But her body was too badly damaged to withstand being moved. The heir gave orders to wait for her natural death and then use it as a sentence. She died at dawn. The servant holding the candle noticed that her chest was not rising. The doctors recorded no breathing, no pulse, eyes motionless. Death was pronounced at 3 o'clock in the morning. Removing the body was a challenge. Servants wrapped her in cloth, but the fabric became soaked and tore, leaving traces of pus and blood on the floor. The guard's report stated the body was carried on boards, emitting an unbearable stench. People covered their faces and crossed themselves. To carry it out through a secret passage, the walls were fumigated with smoke, but the smell still spread throughout the palace. Attempts at embalming were unsuccessful. Doctors opened his chest and abdomen, but the tissue was already decomposing. His heart was black, his liver soft, and his stomach emitted a pungent odor. The doctor's chronicles noted, "The internal organs are destroyed. Embalming is impossible. The body disintegrates at every touch." They smeared him with resin and wrapped him in thick cloths, then placed him in a coffin and closed the lid to hide the smell. After her death, power finally passed to her heir. The old nobility demanded that the brother and musician be put on trial, accusing them of incest and heresy. The new entourage insisted that the Queen's execution was sufficient. In the end, the brother and the musician were brought to the square and sentenced to death to silence the crowd. The people met this with silence, without enthusiasm or indignation. Fear of execution and disease paralyzed the streets. Foreign ambassadors reported in their dispatches, "The Queen's death has given free rein to a new circle." But whispers of her martyr's blood remain among the people. Her suffering will fuel division for many years to come. The monastery chronicles recorded, "She departed in unbearable agony, but her death gave rise to new strife." A week after the funeral, the guards and advisors in the palace were replaced. Documents supposedly signed by her were made public, and her property was divided among her new cronies. The old nobility lost its influence. The people whispered that the Queen had died innocent and that power was built on deception, but fear of the axe prevented them from speaking out. Thus, ended her life. The grandeur that once inspired respect disappeared in the stench of her chambers. Her body rotted while she was still alive, her will was rewritten by foreign hands, and her confessions were turned into weapons. But it was precisely these torments that became the foundation for the new regime. The Queen died, but her death gave birth to a new order, full of fear and blood.